My college draft is proudly announced my conference called Educate You. Educate You core areas will cover recruitment, retention, and how to build a strong alumni base of underrepresented and first-generation college students. All right, so we want to welcome you all to the My College Draft Educate You podcast. I'm your host, Lamar Thompson. I got my people with me. Everybody kind of announce yourselves.
I'm Ricky.
Amber.
Brian. And I'm David.
All right, so today we've been kind of dialoguing a little bit and kind of discussing some things that's been happening, that's been concerning you, and really more important, concerning our people and our kids. So one of the main things that we want to discuss is the college scandal that's been going on right now. I mean, it's been bothering me, y'all. So what bothers me more than anything as a higher ed professional is we working our butt off, we doing what we're supposed to be doing, and then people are trying to shortcut. Am I the only one messed up about this?
Absolutely not. I think that it shows how disparities exist even when educators and the system itself is trying to correct itself, right? So, for example, the first thing I thought of when the college cheating scandal came about was Michigan, and how there were educators as well as community activists, ACLU, so on and so forth, who were trying to create parity amongst students of color within that state in terms of the scholarship offers, those types of things. And they were able to argue that there was a disconnect constitutionally. There was equal protection clause, that there wasn't, students weren't being treated fairly, but yet that got defeated, right? And so they say, basically the whole affirmative action story, you can't do it, right? So, but then you have, these rich people who are able to just buy their way into any institution that they want, while our black and brown kids can't even get a scholarship to attend our institutions. And I think that it's just something that we gotta fix.
Mm-hmm. Well, but I think that if you really, let's just look at this from a different lens, in that when have they not been able to buy their way into an institution? Mm-hmm. The reality is, if you walk on most predominantly white campuses, the buildings are named after donors and people who essentially have a way, right? Mm-hmm. So even if it is money and influence, and children are able to, and they benefit from that money and influence, right? So I don't know that, I guess when I look at this, I'm trying to understand how it's different than a system that's already set up that way in the first place. The reason that I think we struggle is because of the fact that in a lot of different situations, we struggle because we don't have that money and influence, and we don't have that passed down through our ancestry, right? And so I have a different, I guess when I look at it, it's horrible. At the same time, it's what's always been happening. It's what happens all the time. And the second point I'm thinking about is, I think there's the standardized test, the fact that we have to go through all of this to obtain a certain score, and they're willing to do all of that simply to influence a standardized test score, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about the other aspects of it. I know that there were other aspects to the scandal, but a lot of this was tied to that ACT score. Mm-hmm. And all of us know that standardized tests are implicitly biased against minority students. That to me becomes problematic as well, because when we create these kinds of barriers, anytime there's a barrier, there's a way to cheat that. And I'm not saying you can't have barriers. I know that you have to have certain standards, but at the same time, that particular standard doesn't seem to me to be one that should be, I guess, implemented, because there's no way to fairly do it. And it also says something about the fact that if this has been going on this long, and we were admitting students into these schools that technically should not have been admitted, what does it say about those students that were admitted to those schools and graduated? Mm-hmm. You kind of see what I'm saying? So these barriers we raised, even if they did cheat to get in, once they got there, they had to perform like all the other students. So you kind of see what I'm saying? So just to me, it raises some bigger questions about the system that we've set up.
When you say they have to perform, are you saying like there might be jeopardy in which they probably didn't perform and they just paid their way through college as well? Or are you saying like they had to pay to get access into college, but maybe they did have the merit to finish the degree.
Yeah,
It's about the brand and the institution they need to get to.
I highly doubt that they paid their way through all those classes. If you were able to graduate at almost any institution, because to do that would be to say that every professor was corrupt that they had.
Right.
So I can't see that. I think that the biggest part is getting in, and then they got in, and I think a lot of them probably performed.
Well, it's the hypocrisy of the whole system, because I think that they do pay through it indirectly to get those degrees, and
indirectly, yeah.
So for example, these are the same students who will join traditional Greek organizations, which anybody that works in student affairs knows that within those Greek houses they have every old test every old formula. They've rated their professors and all these different types of things. So you have a group of students who already have privilege and access to education. They join these organizations that support them, and then they're able to graduate with honors. They have the cultural capital and the social capital to get the internships that they want, the externships that they want, and then they're able to graduate. Whereas our students, who average ACT of African Americans in this country is 17. For our Hispanic students is a 19, 20, depending on what state you're in. So how does that happen? It's because they're coming through a system that doesn't allow them to cheat to get those scores. Whatever they know from their coursework, they take the test once, and then that's it. Whereas you got these students who, even if they're not even directly cheating this college admissions scandal happened, they buy these $500,000 textbooks, they take these $1,200.
He said $500,000.
They spend that bread. In the school, and we just don't have those resources. So when we get into the door, we still don't have those resources. So it's like it's a cycle, and I think it didn't surprise anybody from our community, but it shined a light on that hypocrisy very brightly that America seemed to want to turn away from.
Looking at it from another higher level, I think it's beyond. I know that the spin that the media is going to do to get ratings and viewership is to spin about the race card and everything else, but I really think it speaks to how much we're divided between class and how it's growing more and more. I mean, on every sector, not just higher education, but living arrangements and medium income and district and redlining. All this is because of class. And so going back to what you're saying, and with this access and these pathways of, if you know someone, because even let's look at the parallel of you have these rich families and well-known celebrities who have the access and pathways and know people who can get them into these schools and colleges, right? For brand, for reputation, right? But then we also have celebrities who get in trouble legally, but then they have the lawyers who can get them off the same way, whereas you got people who minimum offenses get multiple years, right? And it's all associated with class. So, for me, the very first thing I'm looking at is, well, dang, number one, what is the motive behind that? Why not just pay a corporation and get your child a job? Right?
That was my thing.
If you're going to pay $500,000, might as well just go to, some ABC corporation, talk to the CEO, here's $500,000 bonus pay. Right. Give my son to do this.
But before this is the thing. What we all have to understand is, because when you understand the background, right? So one of the things that they were saying was the entry was to pretend they were athletes and then channeling them through, right? And so what does that mean? It says a lot about our athletic system anyway. That's for us, our Underground Railroad into an opportunity when these kids work hard just like anybody else. And so what's going to happen is it's going to open up the athletic thing even more so, and they're going to start channeling in and start poking at the athleticism of a lot of our students, and it's probably going to make probably the ACT scores go up. Am I the only one to think that?
What do you mean make it go up?
Because right now, if they couldn't get in on their own merit, right? Their Trojan horse was the athletic department, pretend they were going to be athletes, and then get them into the school, and then just sit on the bench or whatever, right? And so what's going to happen is,
they didn't even go to no practice or no warm up or nothing.
Not at all.
They were sitting on no bench.
Well, that's what they were saying. They were saying that they're just going to pretend like they're athletes, and just so they can just be into the school, and then they can do what you said as far as like being able to be there on their own merit at that particular point. But you guys don't think it's gonna poke holes at the athletic department?
No, I mean, because the athletic department is kind of like any other sports manufacturing agency, because you're specifically talking, when we talk about athletics, you're talking about football and basketball primarily as the money maker generates, right? And the thing about that is twofold. Number one is that just this past year, the NCAA's men's basketball went through a FBI investigation about illegal agencies and paying people, and that's why the coach from LSU got fired. University of Kansas was under investigation. There's a lot of other institutions that was under investigation, because there's always been this that's the whole narrative behind the pay for play thing, right? Is that these students are doing X, Y, and Z. That's one. But on top of that, I don't think, to answer your question, no, I don't think that's going to change the requirements to get in, because as an athlete, when you're trying to get recruited, there's the NCAA clearinghouse has a formula. So it's really based on, so let's say when I was in high school, I might not have the 21 that you need to get into a college. But if I have the GPA to balance that out, then I can get a lower ACT score and still be eligible, right? So some of these students might have faked the athleticism, but they might have had a high GPA in high school. So that's going to help them, just get to 17 or whatever, or 16 that they need to get in. So I don't think that's going to change, because the NCAA's clearinghouse rules has always been very flexible to make sure that students at least try to get an 18 or whatever, but they can balance that out with their GPA.
So you think that's going to stay universal?
Yeah, and the sports that they picked were sports that nobody, nobody was paying attention.
It was very genius if you think about it.
And so
nobody was on the roster anyway.
Nobody knew who was on the roster. Nobody was paying attention to it. These kids knew that they were getting these scholarships in or whatever, but they didn't say anything either. But what happened is they didn't have the scores to get into these selective institutions that a traditional student would need to have, but they met the clearinghouse rules. So the institution could let them in, admit them as athletes under the clearinghouse rules. And everything's good to go.
But I want to compound on what he's saying, because I think this is an important notion that we have to look at, because when you're dealing with macro systems, it's very hard or sometimes to understand where the discrepancies are in the micro and what's really cranking the gears that's funneling this, right? And the fact that, I want us to give attention to the fact that these sports were intentionally chosen. I'm intentionally choosing water polo and equestrian team, right? And look at the scrutiny because there's so much scrutiny for black athletes when they're trying to do football, basketball, and there's already a microscope on that. But there's not, because these are high level, you don't see too many.
It's associated with class.
It's associated going back, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's going back to class, right? Of that, well, polo is a high, yielding, class for tennis is a high yielding class, and racquetball is, so it goes back to this whole framework, but pathways of access. And so, unfortunately, one thing I would challenge that I think comes out of this is we have people in our community, we have to start looking at other athletic avenues other than just football and basketball too.
We don't have resources to those.
No, but you do. I mean, but think about it. So here's and I'm not trying to take us away from the topic, but just think about this thought exercise. Every single sport in which blacks have come into it, there's been a dominant person. So think about tennis, but way before the Williams just got in there, now it's boom. Basketball, boom. Football, boom. Baseball has kind of changed, but golf, when Tiger came in, boom. And so there's certain sports that I feel like hockey is still kind of there, but now there's more uptick of minorities in hockey. There's a couple of black hockey players, but they're coming, and then you see that transition on to the speed skating and all that. But all I'm saying is that
there's still access though.
It's still access, but
we didn't play no hockey.
Right, that's true. You gotta be relative, right? So you're moving up in Chicago or New York or Wisconsin, the likelihood of you playing that is going to be greater, right? But what I was saying though is, when we look at this college admission scandal, like you said, every area for minority students has always been a hurdle, because we might not have someone who can give you the resources to take you there or know who to talk to. It's just like navigating college in itself. You don't have the resources on it, because the literature shows that a majority of minority students are first generation students, low socioeconomic, limited on the human capital, limited on the social capital, limited on pathways of access, right? And so the real question to me is this: I've always felt the system was never designed with minorities in mind in the first place.
Well,
I'm gonna tell you what, this is what bothers me, man, because like historically, that's always the topic, right? We always gonna be behind. When there are more of us graduating, I would think now than it's been in some years.
We're talking about number wise? We're talking about percentage wise?
Just percentage wise. But even if it's 10 more than yesterday, I'm still trying to figure out how come those 10 are not going back and trying to help and improve.
Go back where?
Well, I'm talking about go back in our neighborhoods because we keep having the same conversation. Like, we always behind. Like, is anybody getting the narrative and anybody getting the baton and going back and trying to make it better?
See, I think that's when you talk about macro and micro, I think that what we're talking about is a much larger issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are plenty of people that give back to their communities in a lot of different kinds of ways. I mean, various ways, and we've seen it. We've seen them with the nonprofits, and you've seen them with the charter schools, or like that are run by a lot of people of color, and how they tailor. You've seen it with the arts. You've seen different pockets, but we are talking about systemic, institutionalized racism, and that is not something that is solved by one or two people going back to their neighborhood. I mean, let's just tell the truth. Once you get to a certain point,
Okay.
if you're moving your people forward through oration and philosophy or anything that's going to draw us together, you get killed. I mean, I'm just saying.
Okay.
Many of us have learned how to fly under the radar, help each other under the radar. There's plenty of boardrooms I sit in where I have to be there to be a voice for my people without saying I'm a voice for my people.
That's real.
Because if I do, then I am not listened to, right?
You have an agenda, right?
Right, you have an agenda. We have figured out, I think, as a population of people that have been historically oppressed, how to navigate, and she agrees, how to navigate the oppressor, right? Essentially, we have to understand how to move the chess pieces in a way that helps our people. And some people are like very forward and vocal, and we need those people. And then some people are more like, I'm gonna be at this boardroom and I understand what I'm doing, right? And some people are more like community service. But I think that the key is to be within your personality, because when whoever you really are is how you're going to navigate it.
But wait a minute. So it's almost sound like when you use the word systemic, that it's never ending. So,
it's not.
It's so big, because systems are so big that it's just think about your car. If there's a major issue with your car, you always have to plug it up first and let the computer try to run an analysis on where the diagnostic problems are, right? Because there's so many components that it could be your air exhaust is what's causing your unclean filters, what's causing the low CO2 sensors to do this and that. And so you can fix something here, but then because you fix it, there's still the remnants of the damage going through the entire system still, right? So it's like a patch.
I'm gonna tell you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, because the one reason why I'm saying is, and because it's a really good segue, because people think if you go to a HBCU versus PWI, then that's really the answer to help cure some of those systemic issues.
Well, I will say that when we talk about from like a graduate standpoint, 80% of your black graduates come from HBCUs. People don't think about that, right? But these same institutions have the least amount of resources, but they're the most efficient with the resources that you have. So when you look at a study and you do like a regression analysis on that, based on the limited resources they have access to, they are more efficient and successful with graduating minority students than predominantly white institutions that have 10 times as many resources.
That's consistent with our culture.
But
So we can cook a meal, because we can cook a meal on $10. We can make $10 stretch for a family of 6. That's consistent with our culture.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
professional schools too, medical school, law school, HBCU, right?
So for us who attended school, why didn't we choose the HBCU?
Well, there's a lot of different issues. I mean, I wanted to go to HBCU. I didn't have them because you got to think about it. Here's some challenges. HBCUs are geographically restricted.
Okay.
Right? So if I lived in Washington State or California, I have to take an extra, I'm going to be away from my family, further away than if I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
Or if I grew up in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Right? I'm further away, so there's more cost to get me there. There's out of state. So if I grew up in Atlanta, I get in-state tuition to go to HBCU.
Okay.
Right? Versus I got paid out of state.
Yeah.
So there's the geographic restriction, there's the financial restriction depending on how far away you are from that institution. Right? And then HBCUs do have their own issues. You know, a lot of it because they don't have the funding, sometimes the maintenance on buildings, resources, the processes are not as advanced as far as updated as far as technology. So your enrollment, you still have to do it by paper, go in there and do it. It might take time for you to get your reimbursement stuff back, whereas the processes are a little bit more up to date at predominantly white institutions. So there's restrictions and stuff. So
Yeah, I know. Well, for me, it was different. I guess growing up in Houston, I had the option to go to HBCU, but I didn't want to. I wanted to go to PWI simply because I feel like I grew up in that neighborhood. I know what to expect, right? But if I'm going to transition from being in an all black neighborhood to going to try to function in a predominantly white society where all of my bosses are probably going to be white and all the people who own the companies or whatever I'm going to work for is white, how do I play that game, right? So I want to go there and learn their game so I can then play their game learn how to play their game on their terms and then try to one-up it. So my choice for that was way different than some people would be, and I got a lot of flack from it coming out of high school, but that was kind of the reason I made my decision.
I mean, I think that's because that's what I was going to say, is that I think a lot of times the decision comes down to what a student needs. And you were saying I needed more cultural exposure to a more diverse population because that's more reflective of the role I'm going to more than likely play in life. And for some people, it's the reverse. They grew up in an all-white private school, and they're like, I need to go. And I've had people that they think that I need to go to. I want to go to a HBCU because I want to be with my people and get to know more about my culture. So I think that a lot of times it does come down, and I'm glad you said that because a lot of times people don't realize that is how a lot of students think. It's just like, I've been in private school, I'm going to go to public school, or parents will put their child in public school for a couple of years because they want them to understand more people and want, right? So I think that particular line of thinking is not talked about, but I think a lot of times that does determine why a student picks an HBCU or over PWI, vice versa.
I think that we have to reduce the stigma or eliminate the stigma for HBCUs, this HBCU versus PWI argument, period. Because I want to piggyback on everybody, but people could choose I chose PWI because it was the only school I applied to. I wasn't even going to college. It was a school I heard of. It was a school that recruited me. I filled out one admissions application. I got in, and I got enough money to go. That was pretty much it. I don't have any real, super inspirational story behind why HBCU over PWI. It was literally just the option that was in front of me. Being from Kansas, there's no HBCUs in Kansas. The closest ones, you have to pay out-of-state tuition, and when's your financial aid package just looking like? But I wasn't even exposed to any of that. So when I got into the college that I was, that's when I first started hearing about this HBCU versus PWI beef that happens, especially amongst black students, where students are trying to validate who they are in their space. And I think that we have to find a way to lift up students that look like us in both areas. We can't allow our students at PWI to feel less than because they don't feel like they're having the same experience of a HBCU. But we also need to make sure our HBCU students know that your blackness is past those HBCU doors. And you have to be able to support those same brothers and sisters that are at PWI, just like you need to support those brothers and sisters that don't go anywhere, right? There's this elitism that's really weird because I feel like one groups feel like they're more elite than others.
I think they both probably have an elitism.
And we have to find a way as educators to explain and express that to students in such a way that, okay, I'm making this decision for me not because there's a pressure to identify a certain way.
So let's say, for example, it was up to any one of you guys to bridge that gap. Like, how would you bridge that gap?
Well, in my opinion, the only way you can really bridge that gap is through finances. That's the biggest decision that most minority students have to make is where can they get the most bang for the buck. And unfortunately, HBCUs, a lot of them don't have the funds and stuff to provide those type of scholarships that PWIs can. So then you look at the decision, I can go to this HBCU, but I gotta pay $2,000 out of pocket myself, or I'm gonna have to work a part-time, or I can go to this PWI and get everything paid for and I'm good. And so there's that side of it. So I think, unfortunately, the way to bridge that gap is if you can start providing the finances to those students, that's wonderful. But I'll answer that in this kind of piggyback question back to you on it. It's the same thought process on a majority of those big time sports programs. They're black athletes. So imagine if all those athletes that can ready to go to the league went back to HBCUs, they'd be balling because everybody would go to the HBCU games to watch what it would pretty much be like NFL games, right? Because pretty much 85-90% of all the athletes in the NBA and NFL are African American. But what makes them go to these big powerhouse programs? The money, the support, the guarantee of networks with brand, exposure, right? So they can tell you, we're guaranteeing you're going to be on NBC, ABC, Fox, ESPN every week. HBCU can't do that. They're going to give you like 2 or 3 weeks out the season. Right? You might see them on March Madness, if they make it to the dance. So, of course, if someone is trying to self-preserve, they want to get as much exposure as they can. They want to make sure that they can go to school without putting as much of their own personal money into it. If they can get someone to sponsor them or do scholarship, they're going to do that. And so, unfortunately, because of the class status, going back to these micro things, we have to make those decisions. That there's a lot of people who I would have preferred. I wanted to go to Hampton. But I'm kind of like B. I wanted to go to Hampton. The only reason why I ended up going to Kansas State because I was trying to holler at a female and she applied, and that's the reason why I applied and I got a yes. That's the only reason why. Because I was on my way to Hampton. I'm just being real with y'all.
Yeah. That's right.
We have to, if we look at the fallout, most of our HBCUs are public institutions, right? And a lot of them are land grants that come from that Second Morrell Act, right? Yep. When we look at the landscape of higher education, the funding for higher education, how all of the state funding, especially in the South, but across the country, has continuously received these cuts from state appropriations, right? Because revenues are not what they need to be in the states. Healthcare is too expensive. They're trying to pay for Medicaid, and to be honest with you, they're paying way more for prisons than what these states should be doing. But I guess I digress on that. But there's those problems in terms of those appropriations. They're exacerbated for our HBCUs. As much as our state institutions are hurting, our HBCUs are hurting far worse because of the cuts that have happened. Not even during the recession, after the recession. Right? So as we're talking about bridging this gap, we have to be able to protect the lifeblood of these organizations, even though we're representing PWIs, either professionally or philanthropically. We have to find a way to put dollars into these institutions so that they can do some of the things that we're talking about.
So there's a case, and I don't think a lot of people. If you look at, if anybody studies higher ed law or whatever, and they're right, how you do an assignment, one case that everybody should study is Hawkins versus Florida. Hawkins versus Florida was a case that dealt exactly what you're talking about, which showed that 17 different states, purposely and intentionally, because during the 1890 Morrell Act, 17 different states intentionally took the money that they were supposed to give to the HBCU so that because the whole Plessy versus Ferguson was what, separate but equal, but it was just saying, we don't mind being, because a lot of people miss that narrative, we don't mind being separate, but give us the equal amount of resources so we have to see playing field, right? Because it's all about resources. 17 different states intentionally misappropriated funds that they're supposed to give to HBCUs, and gave it back to their flagships, right? And programs were shutting down. There's a case with Gaines versus University of Missouri. They shut down their entire law school just so they won't bring a black man into their school, right? And so this is that systemic thing of where we have states who are bold enough to go against the Supreme Court and still misappropriate funds.
I mean, that's what happened at Central High, right? Governor Faubus shut it down for a year. I mean, because he did not want to desegregate. I mean, so you're right. I mean, they'll.
They say in the end, the strong survive. These hurdles I'm facing.